trouble, and you have not got it down.
Any woman who is in her center and wants to speak a truth about her experience through the form of music, that is woman's music.
It's not a sound, it's not a type of music, it's a consciousness, it's a sense of ourselves, who we are, who we're talking to, what we're talking about.
We didn't start out to make a revolution through music, but that is what happened.
Happening right before our eyes. Can I be your beautiful woman?
Women's music is inclusive of all the different things that affect us, and lesbians just have the courage to name it.
My sister and me might be bad sometime. Sister and me playing a hide and seek.
It was the most astonishing experience to me to discover a world of people that I didn't even know existed that were making this world called women's music.
People now have trouble defining what women's music is because it's been changing so rapidly.
Take away my wanting, take away my fear, everything I've been working for. My life is more than a vision.
It arises out of an organic place in you that pays no heed to anything except for what is in your spirit as a woman.
We know that every single human being came through the womb of a woman. And therefore, every single human being had their first experience with rhythm through the heart of a woman, and have been comforted by that rhythm, the consistency, the pulsation of that rhythm, that drum, that throb, through the woman's heart, not the man's heart.
I'm a son of women rise.
In the 1970s, lesbians led other women in building a cultural movement from the ground up, which came to be known as women's music. This is their story. This is Radical Harmonies. Women's music evolved out of an era of fervent social protest, drawing many of its pioneers from the labor, civil rights, and peace movements.
So much for the electronic brains that run the world of banks and aeroplanes. And if one little mouse can set them all around, why not you and I?
Bernice Johnson Regan, whose group Sweet Honey in the Rock is a major force in women's music, began as a civil rights activist, performing with the Freedom Singers.
I had already committed to understanding music as a way to take a stand. And I had models for that. There were people moving around the civil rights movement who had done music with the union movement. People like Pete Seeger, Ronnie Gilbert.
Sometimes I live in the country. Sometimes I live in town.
Ronnie Gilbert is an amazing icon. She was quite young when she went into the Weavers, and they were a tremendously successful group in the 50s, and they were blacklisted. The fabric of her experience had to do with that blacklist and the speaking out when you could lose everything for it. You could go to jail for your politics.
Ronnie would bring this spirit with her when she joined women's music decades later.
I was probably more known in the world peace movement circles, but at the same time I was dealing with my own early feminism. And I noticed that I started writing songs about women who were trying to figure out who they were in this new era, so that when I first went on world peace tours and I was looking for material, it was hard to find anything that I felt I would sing. The first time I sang in the Pacific, we were singing for GIs, and I kept looking for material that felt right coming out of my mouth, but it was all material that had been mostly written by men.
Women who daily confronted sexism in the so-called progressive movements found a home when the second wave of feminism exploded onto the scene. Musicians joined the revolution by singing out against women's oppression.
Never used or abused by authority. Women should be a priority. Women should be a priority. Who is this girl? And what is she to you?
In 1975, activist Bernice Johnson Reagan was galvanized by the Joanne Little case. Joanne Little's jailer had raped her at knife point. She fought back, killed him, and escaped.
She's my sister, Joanne Little. She's our mama.
Some women's bands directly challenged the patriarchy with an explicitly feminist agenda.
When I first met Naomi, she really had a vision about the band. She was just so pissed off when she listened to Mick Jagger, Backstreet Girl, Under My Thumb. She wanted to get the word out. I remember she kept saying this over and over again, to every 14-year-old girl in the United States. The way to do that is through rock music. And she found women who wanted to learn how to play rock and roll so that this could happen.
We had no place to go. We had no role models. You know, you would maybe ask mostly guys, you know, show you a lick or explain something, and in rare instances that they wouldn't assume you were coming on to them, so then you'd know it was okay, but most of the time it was fraught with danger.
We wanted to strike out against this male-dominated cock rock culture which was dominating in the country, and this whole sort of hard rock thing with, you know, women are nothing but groupies or maybe a pretty face. We just couldn't stand that, and we were so angry about it.
There was not a lot of opportunities for women. Not only were there not lots of places to play, there were not a lot of opportunities in bands, even just to go and rehearse.
Oh, you get no more of me.
Access to musical training was also blocked, shutting out women on a fundamental level.
I looked around the teachers and those who were in the leadership of drumming, all male. And what they were bringing to the women who were coming to them to learn to drumming were all these myths and stories and taboos about women in drum. And basically that women should not play the drum because the drum is so powerful that it could hurt our bodies, that it could fry our eggs.
The industry made it really difficult because it really was not creating opportunities in any regard for women. No matter how progressive, you know, during the Vietnam era, how progressive the music was supposed to be, sexism reigned supreme.
Recording contracts for female rockers were extremely rare. One exception was Fanny.
There were a few other bands, but Fanny pretty much was the one that got recognized through Warner Brothers. We were a self-generated and self-sustaining band, and we gained a lot of notoriety and a lot of fans, both in the United States and in Europe.
Major labels may have allowed a few women's bands into their boys' club, but blatant sexism was part of the contract.
Did you ever think that you lived in a cage? Did you ever...
I can recall during Ariel going into their offices and having them say, "Oh, we already have an all-woman band." So, sorry, you know, it's kind of like you're a monkey show or something. And then another guy said, "Oh, we don't want any women's bands, you just have to pay for their abortions." He said this to us.
Have you heard, there's a migration happening, going where the thinking is free.
For all of its insights into sexism, the early women's movement was as reluctant to confront homophobia as society at large.
Women would try to put on a show and no venue would rent to them because it was going to be a lesbian audience. There were no print shops that would print flyers that had the word lesbian on it or gay in any way. Women were scared to death to even go to these events because they might be seen and they would be outed at their job, and they would lose their job.
They say slowly brings the least shock, but no matter how slow I walk, there are traces, empty spaces.
In my early 20s, I just wanted to die. Nothing was happening. I couldn't, you know, and it dawned on me later, it's because I was poor, I was lesbian, I wanted something else, and there was nowhere to land.
And by my heart, be I woman.
Culture is like a climate. You know, it's all around you, but you don't necessarily notice it unless you're like a penguin in the desert. And we were like the penguins, you know, the lesbians. There was nothing in the culture that nourished us, that helped us to flourish.
Women's music was created by lesbians because we had to have it. We needed it.
Couldn't understand why I cut my hair short, why I didn't want to wear pink, but I can sing it loud now. I can sing it loud now. I can sing it loud now. Yeah, I'm proud.
When we went into Canada, as we went through customs and they looked at our songbooks and our records, they didn't want to let us into the country. They wrote up papers that said we were undesirables.
We didn't fit anywhere. We didn't dress the right way. We didn't say the right thing. We were way too political. We were trying to take on issues that no one else really wanted to touch at all. And the fact that we were lesbians, we were willing to risk not having boys like us, which at that time and even now, I think that's very risky for a woman, to shut off that whole half the population.
Meg was performing in nightclubs in Washington. A lot of lesbians would go to see her and she kept getting fired. And they would tell her that she was attracting the wrong clientele.
Those kinds of songs, the very politically overt songs or speaking against something that was oppressive, came out of the inner feeling of, if I don't get this out, I'm going to die.
this woman started hanging around, and she sang me a song at some kind of campus, and it was Angry Athos.
I hate not being able to hold my lover's hand.
I said, gee, that's a terrific song. Why don't I put you on? I had no idea. Why don't I put you on in front of our act? And so I took her to my next booking, and she sang this song, and then Patty and I went on stage and started to do our act. And in the middle, we got stopped by the school administrator and said, you can't play here. And they walked out on stage and stopped us. They said, why? They said, because you put a lesbian on in front of you. And I said, well, I'm a lesbian. Yeah, well, you haven't said it yet, but you put a lesbian act, and they threw us off this campus.
We only played places once. When they brought me out, it was a sure death knell for them.
I hate to tell lies. Live in the shadow of fear.
So I said, you know, Maxine, if this song is so upsetting, let's go into a studio and record this song. And so we went in, and Harrison and Tyler produced it. We scraped our last money together, and we produced a single of Angry Athos, and we didn't know at the time that that was historical.
No longer afraid of being a lesbian.
Lesbians were thrilled with our music. Nobody had ever heard anything like this before.
Woman in your life will do what you must do.
And so, when are you going to make a record? When are you going to make a record? And I got pledges for $3,300. We found Marilyn Reese, who never recorded music. She recorded the spoken word, had a key to a 4-track studio, and we went in there with a gang of women, recorded Lavender Jane. It was a magic moment.
I discovered women's music at a consciousness-raising group that we all went to in the 70s. And someone put on a Lavender Jane Loves Women album. And I was just blown away. I could not believe that this woman used the word lesbian so many times in one song.
She's got ILP, good potential, suffering from PLT, pre-lesbian tension. Don't laugh. It's a terrible thing to watch. I mean, what is more pitiful than two straight women in love with each other? Nothing. Nothing. I know. I've been there.
Sweet woman, whoa, sweet sister. Something new, oh, something good has happened to you.
It's like, go girl. We were wild women. Boy, and we were very happy. We were happy. We were excited. Golly, that was the beginning of, it was kind of like the beginning of a new birth. I'd never played with women before. And I had dreamed of that, but it was kind of remote. Would this ever really happen? And I found myself doing it. It was really quite a freeing experience.
Oh, sweet darling, don't look away.
Well, I didn't know it was women's music. I just was writing my heart out. I began writing music when I was 15 years old, and the first song that I wrote was a song to my lover, Susan, and it was called Song to Susan.
So you just go to any gym class, be sure to see one girl who sticks to teacher like a leaf sticks to a tree. If Miss Berger could see me now.
The first concert I ever went to was a Meg Christian concert in Houston, Texas. That moment did change my life. Because I think it was the first time I'd been in a big enough group, and it was only 100 or something, where I felt that sense of, I'm okay, and there are other people like me that are okay too, and we can all be okay together.
She was a big, tough woman, the first to come along, that showed me being female meant just who could be strong.
I was lovers with Meg Christian, and Meg was performing in nightclubs in Washington. We started to notice in the women's bathrooms, women running into the bathrooms and crying and sobbing. What was going on was that Meg's music and the fact that Meg was paying attention to women in the audience was so moving to them that it was releasing something in them and they were crying.
And made me feel I was free.
When she was introduced and she walked out on the stage, there was so much energy in the room that I literally saw her knocked backwards by it.
I broke into
Women were seeing themselves. I mean, in many cases, it was the first time that women were seeing the entirety of their community, that they got to see that, oh my God, we can fill this room.
that the way back home to me was the road I took to you.
She began to sing, and I listened to her, and I put my head in my hands and began to cry. This overwhelming sense that I had been alone as a songwriter, that I was not alone anymore.
It was once only dining and dancing, evening kisses, morning smiles, and then you said, let's go off together alone for a while.
Women's music has become synonymous with lesbian music, mainly because lesbians have been the driving force of the women's music movement.
By my life, be I spirit, and by my heart, be I woman.
Groups like Sweet Honey and the Rock, who were not lesbian identified, still found common ground with the power of women's music.
I remember the first time I heard a term called lesbian separatists. We were going to be asked to do something with Meg Christian, and she was a lesbian separatist. So we had not heard it before, and we said, what does that mean? And they said, well, everything we do it around, with, and for women. So we looked at each other and said, okay, and we moved ahead.
When Chris came to town, she was an unknown singer-songwriter. When she came to DC, all of a sudden, there was this enormous audience. There were 400 women who came to her show. And she went out on stage, and there was immediate applause. And she started to play her first tune, which was Joanna.
Get down off the ceiling, Joanna.
As she began to play, the audience went crazy. They started to applaud and scream, and she was so startled by it that she forgot the words to the song. And as she was sort of fumbling for the words, out of the audience came this voice, and it was Meg Christian singing the words of Joanna to her. And that's literally how they met.
Joanna, let's sit and talk for a while.
Meg Christian had an idea that if women did something, got together and did anything, something would change. We didn't know what. This was, way back then. But she faithfully went around to every woman artist who came, Bonnie Raitt, and she came to me after her show, asked me what I thought, she and Ginny Burson, of women's music. And I said, what are you talking about? What do you mean by that? I said, I said, do you mean women singing music? She goes, yes, but I think more.
We were making jokes about women's tap dance companies and women's this and women's that, and Chris said, you ought to start a women's record company. And it was a revelation to me. It was, a light bulb went off over my head.
They did the next day. They started Olivia Records.
Sweet darling,
Olivia Records was founded in 1973. In its 30-year history, the company recorded numerous albums, including one of the highest-grossing independent LPs of its time. It was this album, Changer and the Changed, by Chris Williamson, that catapulted women's music into a genre all its own.
You would have this enormous connection, an emotional connection of the music, which hits you in the gut first. It was so powerful that you could literally feel in the concerts consciousness, just light bulbs going on.
Come to your life like a warrior, nothing will bore you. You can be happy, let in the light, it will heal you, and you can feel you, and sing out a song of the soul, and we'll sing the song of the world you sing.
In 1975, a concert tour called Women on Wheels brought thousands of women together to hear and sing along with Margie Adam, Meg Christian, Chris Williamson, and Holly Near. Women's music even broke into television with a special called Come Out Singing.
I was working at a Woman's Place bookstore in Oakland, and one of my jobs at the bookstore was to order and reorder LPs, which at that time we had LPs. And I remember when a flyer came into the store advertising a concert called Women on Wheels. I did not know the four performers. I knew nothing about them, never heard of any of them. But there were other people in the store who were just beside themselves. And I was thinking, well, it's not Aretha, so I mean, you know, why are these people all excited? And it was, of course, explained to me that the four women on this poster represented the best of women's music. And I thought, well, okay, but by whose say so?
The structure that was being built at that time was being forged primarily by white women. There wasn't readily a lot of room for women coming from a really different cultural place. Us coming into that scene was not always a smooth situation because there were real cultural differences.
We were a pretty white-dominated and probably pretty middle-class dominated group. And we represented some segments of women. And even though there were women of color among us, most of the power and control, I think, was with white women.
Why are all these white women always up there? Why are we always looking at the same four white women? Why don't we look at somebody else? Why can't something else happen? And then they brainstorm and they come up, oh, why don't we put y'all on tour by yourselves?
They called the tour The Varied Voices of Black Women. Olivia produced it and wrote work. A company formed by Holly Near and Amy Horowitz did the bookings.
They put us up there and they got Pat Parker, who told the pain and the glory and the truth and the emotion of the history of our people, our feelings. It was really a beautiful kind of thing.
Varied Voices of Black Women tour consisted of Linda Tillery on drums, Gwen Avery, Pat Parker, Mary Watkins, and it was just, you'd never seen anything like it. They really did present this hot, hot, hot show. You know, and either you really fell into it, you know, fell into the well, or some people were repelled. It was almost too much. But that's the good news, you know, because they were groundbreaking.
peace activist Holly Near founded Redwood Records in 1973. When Redwood expanded to include voices of different cultures, the first artists they recorded were Sweet Honey in the Rock.
They actually came to me, and it had to do with radical women, mostly white, who did not want an all-white environment.
Sweet Honey in the Rock had a major influence on bringing women of color into the women's music arena.
Redwood also reintroduced Ronnie Gilbert.
I wasn't in music at all. I wasn't even in theater in those days. I was being a therapist. And I ran into a woman by the name of Holly Near, who dedicated a record to me, unbeknownst to me. And I thought, gee, you usually get asked about this. But apparently she didn't know I was still alive. So that's how far from music I was, very long way. And I put this record on. The songs went straight to my heart, the subject matter. And I thought, my gosh, I've been away a long time.
And the hunter knows where they are, hiding her, she's dying. Hay una mujer desaparecida. We shall go forth from this place, proud of the things we've done.
Another women's recording company with a political agenda was Pleiades Records, founded by Margie Adam and producer Barbara Price in 1976.
When Margie and I started to work together, we really decided that we wanted to do more than just the lesbian community with the music. That was totally where our heart was. It was important. But we also wanted to take it to women who were active in the women's movement but didn't really understand how women's music connected. That led us to doing a national tour for the National Women's Political Caucus to raise money for women candidates.
And one of the things that was really important about the National Women's Political Caucus tour that we did in 1980 is that we went into the Athenaeum in Chicago. We went into very large overground venues. We took lights and sound in, done by women who were professionals. We demonstrated that women could create high-quality productions, even as we were raising funds and consciousness around the fact that women were running for office.
From the heart of the country to the bright city streets, there's a rhythm to the living, and it always repeats with a whole lot of soul and a measure of pride. We are ordinary people simply living our lives. The sun comes up, you start another morning. When the sun goes down, it's the end of the day. We don't have much, but it doesn't really matter. If you get it, the government just takes it away.
We wanted to do everything. We learned how to do everything. We learned how to be a complete alternative because we had to, because that's where the power and the control was. If we just made the music or the poems or the pictures, they would be distorted in their context, or they would be censored, or they wouldn't get to the people who needed them. So we had to create all of it.
Sometimes you lose, most times you choose to laugh a lot and learn to call any draw when we're struggling in the backfield every day, heroes and heroines.
We created our own world. We didn't just have performers. We had to have somebody do the lights for the performer. We had to have somebody who did the sound for the performer. The people that learned how to do those, starting from their home stereo and then going out and taking whatever little money they had from their job and buying their first sound system. And then there had to be somebody to book you, and there had to be somebody to manage you, and there had to be somebody to promote your tour. And then you had to make a record, and then you had to get it distributed.
We would call up women. Where we got the names from, I don't remember, to tell you the truth. Maybe they had bought a record, and we'd go through, we want to go to Iowa. Okay, find somebody in Iowa. Hello, would you like to produce a concert for Meg Christian? Well, they would say, I don't know how to produce a concert. And I would say, don't worry, it's not hard. Get a hall. You got a hall? You got a women's center? Or you got a church? Or here are the different, oh, yeah, I got a hall, okay. We had a sound system, and I learned how to operate the sound system, and we put it in the back of the Toyota, and off we went. Okay, so you don't have to worry about sound. I'll take care of sound. You get a hall, get some lights. Doesn't have to be fancy, just so people can see her. Sell tickets, make posters. That's it. You're a concert producer. Set up chairs.
The sun's gonna shine and the music will flow. Sweet, sweet friends of mine.
The first concert I produced, I thought it was important to have a woman engineer, and it didn't actually occur to me that there were almost no women engineers. So I got on the phone and I started calling, sound companies and said I'd like to arrange for a woman engineer, and they laughed at me, of course. That's when we began to realize that we were developing a whole industry.
Thank you. I need your sweet inspiration. I need you here on my mind every hour of the day. Hey, hey.
You could try to get away with having the guys, the boys, come in and do sound for you and come in and do lights for you, but you'd end up with something that looked and sounded like some kind of rock and roll show when you've got a performer who was so far away from that and they're driving you crazy, they're driving the audience crazy, they don't have any sensibility about a woman's voice or what they actually need to make a performance stunning. And they've essentially ruined your program.
When I was still renting, I would have to redo the crossover points and equalization on the Guy sound system. And I always wondered, well, how did they ever think that they could make women's voices be heard when it was always set for men's voices? And I just remember that dramatically, which was another reason that it was so important for us to get money to get our own sound system.
In 1975, Bodin Sandstrom, Cassie Culver, and Lee Garlington founded one of the first women-owned audio engineering companies in the country.
The trucks kept getting bigger, the speakers kept getting bigger, the sound boards kept getting bigger. Then there was the necessity to reinforce that music to get it out to bigger and bigger audiences. I mean, we're talking the Washington Monument, as I recall. Huge audiences.
From their humble beginnings with living room lights and bullhorns came some of the best in the business. Women's sound and lighting technicians are sought after by movie studios, theaters, and massive concert halls.
There's political power to the personal for the fear you fear you are.
I was 33 1/3 years old when we made that first album, and all of a sudden we had 1,000 albums. Now what? It never occurred to me we'd have to get them distributed.
At one time, there were many distributors of women's music. Two of the most prominent were Goldenrod and Lady Slipper.
Goldenrod got started in May of 1975, and we started with distributing I Know You Know. I was living with a woman at the time who mail-ordered I Know You Know through a catalog. We put it on the turntable to sit down to listen to it. We could not sit down. We kept standing up, getting the album out, looking at the picture, going, who are these women? What are they? What is this album?
We just schlepped albums from one place to another. And we would just set up and play them for them, and they would just buy them. They absolutely were so excited to have access and to have information and to see that there were lesbian musicians singing about things that had something to do with their lives. And I thought, maybe I'll do a catalog of all the recordings by women.
Decades later, Goldenrod and Lady Slipper are still in business.
Women's music, to me, came in the form of young women at colleges in the early 90s. but I knew it as a subculture, and it was the first to support me, and was very, very important in my development. Like all of my first record distribution was through Lady Slipper and Goldenrod.
Women's bookstores, radio programming, and Hotwire, a quarterly magazine, also promoted women's music. And documenting it all for posterity were photographers and graphic designers. The heart and soul of the movement came most alive at its festivals.
The festivals have really been the basis of it all. The festivals are how we found each other.
It's a long way from the Delta to the North Georgia hills, and a tote sack full of ginseng won't be no tackle. I'm too old to ride the rail, but I'll make it on my own, and I guess I'll never make it back to home. My muddy water, Mississippi, don't go home.
The festivals are a place where women, mostly lesbians, but not all, come together to hear the music, but they also come together to be with each other, and not only check each other out, but to check their own realities and to expand.
We tend to think of the locus of lesbian feminist activism as either East Coast or West Coast, but really it's the Midwest that contributed the longest running, biggest festivals. And so the really first big festival is national.
I am asking everything you have to give.
It all started in Champaign-Urbana when Kristen Limbs, indignant about the lack of women performers at the local folk festival, fought back.
I went in there to them and said, how could you have a folk festival that is all male? This is inconceivable to us. And they said there just weren't any women good enough. And I am so glad that was said to me, because that got my dander ruffed. My sister and I were so outraged. We said, what do you mean no women good enough? We put an ad in the paper and said, no women good enough? Come and audition at our Women's Folk Festival. We programmed it for the same night as the all-male folk festival. And we had an overflow crowd. From what I hear, theirs was very woebegone.
Inspired by the success of her Women Folks Festival, Kristen Limbs founded the first National Women's Music Festival in 1974.
Wrote the song, and so we'll celebrate 20 years of the festival and of Misty Mountain. Up the Misty Mountain, wildflowers find the ground, down by the Russian River.
The greatest tribute to Kristen is that this festival is celebrating 20 years. And we owe it to someone who said, I'm mad as hell and I ain't gonna take it no more. Screw those boys. We're gonna do it our way. We got too much talent to keep down.
Excited by the idea of a 3-day outdoor festival, Lisa and Christy Vogel, along with Mary Kendig, set out to produce the Michigan Women's Music Festival, which first took place in 1976.
And I kept getting a lot of people saying, you're nuts, like we're in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. What we've done is thrown 1 or 2 good keggers.
Don't you think it's time you had a change of life?
We literally have a party at our house, stop the music right at the most exciting moment and pass the hat. We had no money. And so we went off to Champaign and everybody's thinking, who are these women who are doing this big festival in Michigan? And we went there with a hand-drawn ditto master that we'd snuck into the university and done with a little, like the little purple ink. And all the other producers who at that point were taking themselves very seriously were going, wait a minute, you're doing this big thing that we're all talking about. what's up with these ditto masters, you know? First festival was 3 days long, and there ended up being 2,000 women who came. Many more than we had imagined might come.
The first time I went to Michigan, it was my first exposure to being surrounded by such great all-women performers. You know, I had never seen that before. And being a little Latina from, you know, from San Francisco, and I was like with my red lipstick and my high heel shoes in the middle of the woods, and I just went, wow, this is amazing, all these women.
I'm so proud of the things we invented. I don't know if anyone was doing them in 1973, 1974. We made up the sliding scale. We didn't want any woman to be turned away because she didn't have the means.
We didn't want to exclude any woman. So those women who had been marginalized, deaf, differently abled, in wheelchairs, suddenly it became an issue. What do we need to do to change our practice so that all women can experience our culture?
I'm just looking for some real love.
I'd never been in an environment where a production company changed policy to take care of the audience.
Oh, real love, real love, real love. Can't you see me?
I think that was a true gift because those concerts were being interpreted for deaf women. I mean, for heaven's sakes, at Michigan, you know, you had accessible camping.
We have other campers up the blacktop here. This used to be a boardwalk. It was made out of wood, and in the last 5 years, they put this in, and it's made it more accessible.
I couldn't be doing it without DART. I couldn't possibly come to the festival. I couldn't haul my gear. I couldn't be in a location far away from downtown. This year, I am less able than I was last year. I'm MS, chronic progressive, and so each year I find myself camping a little closer to the action, and so this year I'm smack on top of the action.
Open up your heart and let us in.
Susan Freundlich's simple wish to share women's music with a deaf friend proved revolutionary.
She was teasing me about how hearing people seem addicted to music. And she was saying, why do you always want to have this music on? What is the big deal?
Go back into the darkness like the wild thing that you are.
I had just gotten the Changer and the Changed. And I was so thrilled. I thought it was the best thing I'd ever heard in my life. And I said to, I tried explaining something about it, and it just didn't make any sense to her. And so I said, well, let me just show you what one of these songs says, and tried to sign it as best I could. And she got very still. She said, I never knew that hearing people had the same feelings that deaf people do. That was when I started talking to producers to say, hey, I promise you won't have to do anything extra. I'll do it all. Let me put this together.
Susan started with Holly Near and ultimately helped to usher in a whole community of signers who made access part of public life.
Every time you see a public official speaking locally or nationally, they've got an NASL interpreter by their side. That is something that did not exist before the women's music industry.
It's a doggone shame some people don't look inside. Instead they spend their time just what you feel behind.
It's always nice to have the deaf person be on stage doing the interpreting, because sign language interpreters usually don't sign as naturally as deaf people do, so the deaf people have much more joy to see a deaf person on stage signing. I always knew that I'd like to have a chance to, you know, do the interpreting myself, and I couldn't figure out how in the world that would come about until Sherry sort of told me that I could. She said, come on, let's do a gig together. And I could see the audience's response to me when I was on stage, that they were getting something out of it. You know, they're flashing all the lights and very thrilled with the work.
The evolution of sign language interpreting was not without controversy, including concern about cultural sensitivity.
We started to go through the material and we sang something with Africa, and she did this. And I said, what did you just sign? She said, Africa. I said, is there another sign for Africa? She said, I can spell it out. I said, okay. And so then I realized that racism could be expressed in any language, and we were bringing it onto the stage. Then I met Isai Maria Barnwell. She was singing and signing at the same time, and it was colored. I walked up to her and I said, when you sign, you look black. Why? She said, well, sign language is just like any other language. It is culturally defined.
As women's music made strides toward providing access for all women, it was also expanding to include different musical and entertainment genres.
People like Kay Gardner demanded that classical music be a part of it. Mary Watkins, as a keyboard player, says jazz and blues are part of what we do. And women just kept showing up and saying, me too, me too, me too, and the picture just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Women's music became women making music. It didn't matter what style it was at all. I mean, here I am, a classical musician, folk, jazz, everything.
And it's never, no, it's never failed me yet. That's what we call it.
Part of the evolution and the empowerment that took place had to do with the claiming of this space for music without lyrics.
I did sing more in the beginning because I didn't quite trust that people were open, but they are. You know, when it's real and when you dare to really speak your truth as best you can, people, they get it. And that has, and that's opened me up in the world, period. I mean, this whole thing has opened me up.
She's so tired and lonely. Where is the spirit healer?
When I started going to a few women's concerts, I thought, oh, where's the jazz? Where is the improvising? I came home from the Michigan Festival and I went to a workshop for women in jazz, and there were the women of Alive, right
in the room, Carolyn Brandy and Suzanne Vincenza. It began as a trio, and we fell in love with each other that night.
Because it's too dangerous to run in the park, run in the dark, run in the park, run in the dark. Get showered and dressed, get the cats fed, get the kids off to school, sit down and make myself a cup of fresh, strong, healthy decaf.
The Women's Phil was the brainchild of Elizabeth Min, who was our first music director. She was studying conducting.
I had a professor who was a woman who was a very outspoken feminist. I asked her at one point, hey, where are the women composers? And she said, well, there really aren't any, but music is universal. And that stuck in my head.
She found works by women composers, and I think that was really one of the main impetus of the orchestra.
The mid-70s brought a profusion of women's choirs. Among the first were Sue Fink's LA Community Women and Kathy Roma's Anacrusis Choir in the Midwest.
They created mission statements or philosophies, and many of these included in the goal to commission works by women composers. And these collaborations were incredible because what it gave choirs and conductors the opportunity to do was to choose texts that really spoke to the lives and the experiences of women. Ready. Music that came forward through the mouth of a Ronnie Gilbert or a Holly Near is now going to be sung by young people and college-age people across the country.
The women's music cultural movement grew to include dance, comedy, and other forms of theater. Chrissy Kiefer founded the Wallflower Order, which toured on the same circuit with women's music.
I think that our national impact was so enormous that the festivals kind of had to figure out a way to start opening up to different art forms.
Well, it's not just women's music, it's women's culture, dance, and comedy for sure, because I think now comedy is where our politicizing is coming from. They can just punch you right between the eyes.
I mean, even in the area of safe sex, right? A man pulls out a condom, it's obvious what body part it's for. We're stuck with something for your teeth. What the heck is a dental dam?
Every civil rights movement does boil down to bathrooms at some point. It's true. There weren't any women in the Senate because there weren't any bathrooms for them. Now they build the bathrooms and they will come. That's the thing.
One of the most explosive issues in women's music from the very start was women-only spaces.
Holly Near and Malvina Reynolds were both coming to the festival for the first time, and they were appearing the same night. Holly wanted no men. Malvina insisted upon the right of men to attend. It was so traumatic. I'll never forget the scene on Thursday late afternoon on the steps of the auditorium. Malvina distributing her leaflet, and Holly about 100 yards down distributing her leaflet, saying the best thing you can do if you support our music, you men, is not to attend. The university busted us and said, either you let men in or you close down. So we didn't have to resolve it. Well, in a sense, I mean, it was resolved for us, not by us.
People would always ask me, why women only? And my response over the next 20 years of starting Olivia, my response was always the same. It was, if you could name 5 women bass players, 5 women guitar players, 5 women drummers, 5 women producers, 5 women engineers, we will stop. And never did get anyone to do that for me.
We are on our sacred land.
To have that space, to create that space so that women could be safe for maybe the first time in their entire life, that was a precious, precious experience.
We
we drag people here because of the safety. You know, people who've experienced a hard time or been attacked, we say, come here, and it's a healing place.
I was able to bring my mother to Michigan 3 times, which was just a totally wonderful experience for both of us. I didn't tell her the women mostly didn't wear clothes until after she bought her non-refundable ticket. And I didn't tell her that the showers were outside until she was on the land in the van coming from the airport. And, but we had been on the land like maybe 2 days, and we were walking down the path, and she turned to me and she looked at me and she said, I now know what freedom is. She said, I never knew this before.
Women passing through the world, sharing tears and struggle with the strength of miles behind.
You know, it's very, very complicated to make a safe space for everybody. And we tried, and we succeeded to some extent, and we failed to some other extent.
Family of woman, we've begun.
I found myself in a situation where everywhere I was going, the fact that I was coming and asking for women only, and then at some point lesbian only concerts, was divisive in every community I was going to.
Armies made of lovers cannot fail.
We created a closed and separatist environment. And in that closed and separatist environment, we learned and we became strong. And then we broke that like an egg and went out into the world and did what it was that we wanted to do.
Here come the lesbians, here come the leaping lesbians.
We're gonna please you, tease you, hypnotize and tightly squeeze you. We're gonna get you if we can.
In 1977, Anita Bryant was the spokesperson for Florida Orange Juice, and she came out with a very strong anti-homosexual stand.
Don't pray for me, you proper lady. Pray for the...
We did a collection dedicated to her called Lesbian Concentrate, which showed an orange juice can that said Lesbian Concentrate, and they were a collection of lesbian songs.
It was really the first time Olivia used the word lesbian on an album cover or in the music itself.
Producer Linda Tillery recalls recording one of the most popular songs on the album.
We were assembled in the living room, and we ran the tune 1 or 2 times, and then we hit it. And I remember thinking, this is the bomb, okay? When it was released, every woman I knew was singing Sugar Mama. I wanna be your sugar mama. Be a sugar mama, be a sugar mama every day.
Lesbian Concentrate was just one of the 15 albums produced by Grammy-nominated producer Linda Tillery.
I was allowed to produce some records because I was a woman, as opposed to not being allowed to produce records because I was a woman. I can't tell you how meaningful it was for me when the group Bibi Kirosh came to me and said, we'd like you to produce our first record.
How do I feel when I feel like sin, feel like praying? It's so good, so right to be with you tonight. So good, so right to be with you tonight.
Women's music began its second decade in the 1980s, a cause for celebration. Olivia's staff and fans traded flannel shirts for tuxedos and headed to Carnegie Hall. 2,000 women joined Meg, Chris, and other artists to commemorate Olivia's 10th anniversary.
How do I feel when I feel like being, feel like
For me, it was like a marking point that said, we did it. We did it.
The 1980s were also a time when festivals expanded into uncharted territories. Sister Fire created a totally new experience.
We wanted it urban. We wanted it to be family-oriented. We wanted lots of kids there. We wanted it, of course, multiracial, multicultural, multi-genre, and accessible.
An inclusive festival in urban DC was one thing, but taking women's music festivals to the rural South was quite another.
I was traveling around with some friends from the South who'd all moved away soon as we could get out, fleeing Confederate closets of pain.
I started the Southern Women's Music and Comedy Festival in a place called White County, Georgia. Only we called it White, you better believe it, County, Georgia. And the first year we went down there, I went to with these big dykes around me, and I went to the sheriff's office, and I was wearing a fatigued military uniform, and I kicked in the door, and I said, look, my name's Robin Todd. I'm an actor. I was trying to be tough, and I want you to, I know the Ku Klux Klan is here in White County and very organized, and if anybody tries, and I know that you know that there are going to be 2,000 lesbians here this week, if anybody tries to get on our land, we're armed, and there's no way, there's nothing I can do to control these women. And nobody bothered us. All the camp could hold was 2,000, and 2,000 showed up. When they came to this, they were so scared.
And we didn't know whether we wanted to get out of the car or not. We really weren't sure. But we stayed anyway.
Well, they had our car blocked in.
Well, that's true.
If I could have gotten out, I would have went home.
It was real scary.
I was real scared. These people, these women everywhere, they just looked different, and they didn't look godly, you know. It was awful, and it was another one of those times that, being raised First United Jesus Name Pentecostal, I have spent most of my life praying, and at that festival, I prayed.
Some folks are built like this, some folks are built like that. The way I'm built now, don't you call me fat, because I'm built for comfort, I ain't built for speed.
And the transformation of the first day of them coming in being so frightened, and just the energy of hearing this affirmative women's music, feeding them back the politics that it's okay, that we're proud, that we're dykes, that we're out, that we're loud.
At the end of that festival, I stood in line so that I could talk to Robin. And I said to her, I said, "Sister, you have changed my life forever."
These two women grabbed me and they started to sob and to weep about how they finally were out of their isolation, how this had changed them. They never thought anything like this existed. And they couldn't talk to me because they were crying so hard. And so I took both of them in my arms, and they were just weeping and weeping.
You know, when I went to Robin's first festival, the reason I cry so is I was real close to suicide, real close. I already had a plan. And I walked transformed. I mean, it was better than baptism. You know, I walked out of that festival a new woman, a woman with purpose. I needed to do something. This could help people. And by working and doing, I was healing myself.
In 1989, Wanda and Brenda began the Gulf Coast Women's Festival. After several years of being displaced and harassed, the Hensons finally raised the money to buy their own land.
Finally, we found this piece of land in Ovett, Mississippi.
And our goal was to have lesbians living on the land, creating lesbian culture. And from that vision, we could do all kinds of community efforts.
It'd be festival all year long. It wouldn't just be, I mean, there'd be the festival the one time of the year, but there would be a space for concerts and events and plays and in a library, and we could just have all these things. It'd be a wonderful space. And so we're really excited. It's finally, it's a dream come true. And on November 8th, 1993, someone shot and killed a dog and hung it on our mailbox.
With sanitary pads on the sides of the mailbox with a 9mm bullet hole put right through that mailbox. The intimidation that has been right up in our face that lets us know that there is a real possibility that they will kill us before this is over.
The National Gay and Lesbian Task Force jumped on this immediately. There's this wonderful woman named Robin Kane. She got it out there to everyone that something was happening. And she saved our lives, literally.
Yeah, she did, because if we had been a few lesbians on that land and nobody knew about us, they would have killed us in a heartbeat.
There were 55 women at that festival, and I had T-shirts made that said "The Few, the Proud, and the Brave" for that festival. It's amazing that they keep coming back every year.
Today, women continue to seek out this and other festivals around the country, drawn by a magic they find nowhere else.
They come for the community. The concerts are the celebration of the community. But the community is something where we get to experiment with a value system that is almost the antithesis of how the value system works, like in the real world.
I just can't say enough good things about festival culture. Everybody I've ever interviewed has said, this is where I go to get my annual dose of light and energy. And it really is a spiritual movement.
7 days of women, women's voices, women's village, women peace, women from everywhere, women who think everything in the world. Who wouldn't come? Nothing but women. Women who created the music, the art, the fun, the food. Women, all of us together.
It's the women. You know, it's the land is incredible, but I think what the land holds for us is really the cumulative energy of 22 years of women.
We give ourselves energy. We need that. We need support. We need the strength. We need someone to say, you can do it. And this is what I get. When I come to Michigan and I perform, by time I'm finished and ready to go home, I'm well equipped for the next year.
Trust the rhythms in your body, magic power woman. Trust the rhythms in your body, sister. With our power to bleed and our power to birth, to heal the earth.
I'm just happy to be alive, to witness the progress of this ever-growing, beautiful, vital art form. I love to see the new young bands. They're not afraid of anything that I know of. It seems like we did our work well, in that they aren't afraid of the same things. They'll say anything.
You're just begging me to hold you, yeah, whatever you want. I'll give it to you. I'm gonna give it to you, so you're just begging me to hold you. 'Cause your mouth waters stretched out on my bed. Your fingers are trembling. Your heart is heavy and red, yeah, your head is bent back.
It's a new version of an old wave. Women singing about our concerns, and it's angry, and it's out front, and it's in your face.
You know, it's not my kind of music, but I sure do love to see them on stage because they're having great fun, and they're also doing very important work. So I'm seeing a whole new generation come up.
The younger 20 generation of women are really politically radical.
I think it's a good political statement, a social statement, in kind of being visible. You know, we're representing the new women's music. Well, yeah, and all the younger kids are looking up, and they now have more role models than they did.
I know that emotional resonance of hanging on every word and identifying with what the artist was trying to say or make me feel. And I understand that because I know firsthand, via the internet, the emails I get from other kids and queer kids, that they're doing the same thing with my music. And that blows me away.
You young ones, you're the next one, and I hope you choose it well.
To hear women, you know, early on, Chris and Farron, and probably a lot of the women that I listen to that aren't considered quote-unquote part of the women's scene, which would have been Patti Smith and Chrissie Hynde and Billie Holiday and Nina Simone and a lot of these, you know, great artists, it's just a role model. I mean, it just makes you see it and you go, I can do that. She's doing it, nothing stopped her, I can do it. I mean, spiritually, it's just empowering.
Rosalie, the times are spinning so damn fast, you think they'd stop.
The whole dream of being your own independent force was the dream of us girls from the late 60s through the 70s and into the 80s. I think that Ani DeFranco manages to carry that on for us, if for those of us who after a while just kind of got weary.
I would share stages with Farron. She's just a stunning songwriter.
I went to the Farron concert when I was 16 in high school, and I saw my softball coach there at the Farron concert. She was gay. But Farron, man, knocked me out.
Go down there, go down there, go down, go down, go down there.
I know that what we're doing to a lot of people is really radical. And so I feel like we're radical women.
I strapped on my boots and I walk down the street and I go right into the local DKB drag king bar, that is.
Stuff Alex Dopkin was doing back then was radical. When I first met her, I really felt the sense of her seeing me. And the sense, I remember even she might have said something about passing the torch.
I think you make yourself available and you make your experience available to people so that they can take from you what they need.
I used to follow June Millington around when I was 16 years old and beg her to tell me everything she knew about playing the guitar. June had this Strat I really wanted, and she let everybody and their mother play that Strat for years. I finally went up to her and I said, hey, I'm your freaking protege, you know? I'm the person who has been studying you since they were 15. I want that guitar. Give me that guitar. I'm not leaving here without that guitar. And I took that guitar from her.
Toshi's first teacher was her mother, Bernice Johnson Regan.
I'm just lucky that, you know, I came as her daughter and she's my mom. I don't have enough words to talk about how much she means to me as a musician, as an artist,
as a person, the work that she's done in her life for a lot of people.
I think Toshi Regan is a fierce woman. She is really powerful. One of my favorite people in the universe. She just happens to be my daughter.
We had an impact, we made a difference, or there could not be Melissa Etheridge today.
We have to constantly be creating these like subcultures and our own infrastructure in the underground. And there's always been these radical group of women that have done it. And it's allowed other people like me to go up through the mainstream.
If what we want to see as older women is ourselves looking younger, it's not going to happen. But that would mean that time had stood still, and we would ultimately be bored and disappointed by our clones. And I think that it's very exciting what will come next.
It's evolving, it's morphing, but that's because we are. And it's a beautiful thing. It's the good news, and to some people it's the bad news, but it's actually, that's the excitement of the journey.
Rock on, girls.
I'm very happy to be alive right now, to be part of this movement of women's music, because it's a movement.
The greatest piece of work to come out of women's music are the women themselves. We were trying to create whole human beings who had a sense of self-esteem and self-empowerment to be the best that we could be.
Folks say God made even Adam, and not no Adam and Steve. When we make love, there ain't no doubting. But God made that girl in me, and I wanna sing and shout.
Made some room for something different to happen. It helped those people who probably would have to have come out anyway, eventually. But it gave them a little something to base themselves on.
What women's music has brought us is freedom to be creative, longevity, a sense of importance in our lives that I don't think we would have experienced otherwise.
Coming into women's music and hearing, seeing, experiencing the love, the support, the diversity of interest among women, that transformed me. I have been transformed by women's music.
With women's music, still, I don't think we've seen all there is. And isn't that exciting?
home to me was the road I took to you. Not the way back home to me was the road I took to you. Sweet woman, rising inside my glow, I think I'm missing you. Singing to me them soft words.